The night shift at St. Eliza Memorial Hospital was always quiet in a way that felt heavy rather than peaceful. The corridors echoed with distant beeps and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes, while most of the city slept unaware of the fragile battles being fought behind these walls. For Dr. Arif Malik, a young resident barely 2 years into his medical career, the night was just another test of endurance, compassion, and faith in a profession that often gave little back. Room 709 had become his silent responsibility. The woman inside had been there for weeks, unmoving, unresponsive, suspended between life and something beyond it. Her name was Elena Whitmore, though most staff simply referred to her as the coma patient. Only a few knew the truth, that she was a self-made millionaire, founder of a global tech empire, and one of the most powerful women in the country. None of that mattered to Arif. To him, she was just a patient whose charts told a grim story and whose body bore the marks of a long, losing fight. That night, Arif entered the room with fresh bandages and a quiet determination. Elena had developed pressure wounds on her arm where an old IV site had become infected. It wasn't dramatic work. No flashing monitors, no heroic procedures. Just cleaning, dressing, and care, the kind of work that rarely made headlines but often made the difference between dignity and neglect. As he gently removed the old bandage, Arif spoke softly, the way he always did, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. "I'm sorry this hurts," he murmured, cleaning the wound with careful precision. "I promise I'll be gentle." He talked as he worked, telling her about small things, how the hospital cafeteria had burned the soup again, how his mother kept calling to ask if he was eating properly, how sometimes he wondered if he was strong enough for this job. He didn't know why he spoke. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just his way of reminding himself that the person lying there was still human. Elena lay perfectly still, her breathing slow and rhythmic, machines doing much of the work her body could not. Her face, though pale, still carried a quiet elegance. The kind that suggested strength, discipline, and a life once lived at full speed. As Arif finished dressing the wound, his fingers brushed against her hand. It was warm. That alone felt like a small victory. "Good night, Ms. Whitmore," he said quietly. "You're not alone." He turned to leave, but something made him pause. A sound. It was faint, almost imagined. A soft exhale that didn't match the rhythm of the ventilator. Arif froze, heart pounding. He turned back slowly, watching her face. Her fingers twitched. For a split second, his medical training told him not to jump to conclusions. Reflexes happened. Muscles spasmed. But then her eyelids fluttered, once, twice, like wings testing the air after a long winter. "Ms. Whitmore," he whispered, stepping closer. Her eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, clouded with confusion and pain. Her breathing grew uneven, chest rising sharply as if she were drowning in air. Arif moved instantly, pressing the call button and steadying her shoulders. "It's okay," he said firmly but gently. "You're in a hospital. You're safe. I'm here." Her lips trembled. A hoarse sound escaped her throat, not quite a word, but enough to shatter the silence of the room. Within moments, nurses rushed in, alarms softly ringing, the room filling with controlled chaos. Arif stepped back as the senior doctor took over, but his eyes never left Elena's face. She was awake. After weeks of stillness, after doctors had quietly discussed outcomes and probabilities, she was awake. The next hours passed in a blur. Tests were run, scans ordered, family notified. Arif stood outside the room, hands trembling, unable to process what he had just witnessed. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, the twitch of her fingers, the opening of her eyes, the way she had looked at him as if anchoring herself to his voice. By morning, the hospital buzzed with restrained excitement. A coma patient regaining consciousness was rare enough. But when her identity became widely known, the atmosphere shifted entirely. Administrators whispered. Security increased. Executives from her company began arriving, faces tense with disbelief and relief. Arif, meanwhile, tried to disappear into his routine. He changed charts, checked vitals, avoided attention. He was just doing his job, he told himself. He hadn't performed a miracle. He had only changed a bandage. Later that day, he was called into the recovery room. Elena was awake now, propped up slightly, her eyes clearer, more aware. Tubes still surrounded her, but there was unmistakable life in her expression. When she saw Arav, something shifted. Her gaze locked onto him with quiet intensity. "That's him," she said, her voice weak but steady. The room fell silent. "That's the doctor," she continued. "The one who talked to me." The senior physician smiled politely. "Many of our staff speak to patients, Ms. Whitmore." She shook her head slowly. "No. This one, he treated me like I was still here. Like I mattered." Arav felt heat rise to his face. "I just did what anyone would do," he said softly. Elena watched him for a long moment. "You don't understand," she said. "I couldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes. But I could hear. Not always clearly. Mostly noise. Machines. Silence. But your voice, it cut through. When you touched my hand, when you apologized for the pain, I held onto that." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. In the days that followed, Elena's recovery became a phenomenon. Media outlets speculated, doctors debated the cause, and analysts called it a miracle. But Elena knew better. She asked for Arav often, requesting him specifically during rounds, insisting that he explain procedures, that he speak the way he always had. One afternoon, when the room was quiet and sunlight streamed through the window, she asked him to sit. "You know," she said, "I've built companies, fired executives, controlled markets. I've been surrounded by people my entire life. But I've never felt as seen as I did when I couldn't respond." Arav listened, unsure what to say. "When I wake up fully," she continued, "I plan to change some things. Starting with this hospital." True to her word, Elena funded a new patient care initiative focused on humane treatment, extended nurse staffing, and training programs emphasizing emotional connection, not just clinical skill. She personally requested that Arav be placed on a fast-track mentorship program, offering to sponsor his education if he wished to specialize further. But the biggest change wasn't institutional. It was personal. Elena often said that waking up taught her the value of presence. Arav often said that night reminded him why he became a doctor. Their lives crossed for a reason neither could fully explain. A young doctor with tired eyes and a quiet voice. A powerful woman trapped in silence. And a simple act of care that proved sometimes, the smallest kindness can wake a soul back to life.